Welcome to a brand new deep dive. I'm really excited about this one because I have a massive, just a massive stack of sources in front of me today.
It's a huge pile.
It really is. We've got excerpts, we've got research notes, and historical chronologies drawn straight from the sci-fi saga Paul of Dune.
Right, which is just incredibly dense material.
Totally dense. And our mission today is to take all this material and really extract the underlying mechanisms of power. Like, we are going to unpack this intricate web of galactic politics, these ancient vendettas that just span generations, and, well, the honestly agonizing personal sacrifices required to rule.
Yeah, it's not a fun job.
No, not at all. But more than that, we're looking at this entire universe through a very specific lens today, which is the Crucible.
The Crucible, right?
Yeah, we want to understand exactly how these massive, literally universe-crushing pressures are intentionally engineered to forge a 12-year-old boy into a legendary leader. We are basically looking at the architectural blueprint for the mind of Paul Atreides.
And, to really understand that psychological architecture, we have to start by examining the foundations built upon. Because the sources we're looking at, they don't just describe a neat futuristic setting.
Right.
They describe a highly unstable, hyper-feudal galactic empire. So, just to set the stage for you, imagine a political ecosystem that's governed by this really tense three-way standoff.
Okay, a standoff between who?
Well, you have the Padishah Emperor, right? He holds ultimate military might, but he is counterbalanced by the Landsraad.
And the Landsraad is the assembly of all the great houses, right?
Exactly. So if the Emperor moves against one house too aggressively, the rest of the Landsraad will just unite and obliterate him.
Wow, so it's mutually assured destruction, basically.
Pretty much. And this creates a reality where direct open warfare is, well, it's incredibly rare and highly regulated, but shadow warfare.
The War of Assassins.
Yes, the War of Assassins is just constant. It never stops.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. Because if you can't just send an army to solve your problems, that means every single human interaction becomes weaponized.
Oh, completely.
Like, marriage isn't about love anymore. It's an economic and military blockade. A dinner party is essentially an intelligence gathering operation.
Precisely. And overseeing all of this genetic and political maneuvering is the Bene Gesserit sisterhood.
Right, the sisterhood.
Yeah, and they operate under this core axiom that really serves as the thesis for everything we are exploring today, which is life shapes life.
Life shapes life. I love that.
It's so important. They believe that every event, every trauma, every calculated interaction leaves its mark, both in fine detail and in broad strokes. Yeah. They are actively engineering environments to create very specific psychological outcomes.
Which means the people we are talking about today aren't just characters making random choices. They're products of extreme environmental conditioning. And to grasp what young Paul is dealing with, we need to quickly map out the primary factions exerting pressure on him in these sources. Most of you following this universe are already familiar with House Atreides.
Led by the honorable but deeply burdened Duke Leto.
Right. And their ancient existential rivals, House Harkonnen, governed by the calculating Baron Vladimir.
The Baron is always calculating.
Always. But these texts introduce us to a secondary, honestly incredibly lethal proxy war between two other factions.
Yeah, so we have House Ecaz, which is ruled by Archduke Armand. Now, Ecaz is this beautiful ecological paradise. It's a vital hub for exotic pharmaceuticals.
But Armand himself has some issues, right?
Oh, big time. He is consumed by this inherited systemic thirst for vengeance. And on the other side of that blood feud is House Mortani, governed by Viscount Hundro.
And their planet is basically the opposite of Ecaz.
Completely. House Mortani rules Grumman, which is a planet that has been ruthlessly strip-mined into this barren, desperate husk.
So we have an ocean planet, Caladan, an industrial wasteland, Giedi Prime, a lush paradise, Ecaz, and a mined-out rock, Grumman. And they are all locked in this massive political death spiral.
That's a powder keg.
It really is. So if life shapes life, how do you even begin to design an educational curriculum for a child who is destined to inherit this kind of multiplanetary powder keg?
It's a daunting task.
Because looking at these sources, 12-year-old Paul Atreides is absolutely not getting a standard education.
No, not at all. And we see the reality of his education right at the very beginning of these texts. Paul and his family are leaving their home planet of Caladan, and they're traveling via this massive gilt highliner.
Those ships are just impossibly huge.
Oh, they carry entire fleets within them. But what stands out immediately in the source material is the enforced ambiguity of the trip. No one will tell this 12-year-old boy where they are going.
Which would drive any kid crazy.
Right, but the entourage traveling with him isn't a group of traditional tutors. His instructors are, frankly, some of the most lethal operatives in the galaxy.
Yeah, it's like a cabinet of Navy SEALs.
Exactly. You've got Thufir Hawat, the Mentat master of assassins. You have Gurney Halleck, who is this hardened warrior troubadour. And Duncan Idaho, a Genaz swordmaster.
I really want to focus on how Paul extracts information from these guys because it is wildly impressive. Paul doesn't just whine and ask, are we there yet?
No, he doesn't.
He conducts like a localized espionage operation. He goes to each of these lethal men and runs a pressure test.
He really does.
He asks Thufir if they're going to the planet Dex. He presses Duncan on whether they are visiting the ruined Genaz swordmaster school. He's deliberately tossing out these highly charged specific locations. Why does he do that?
Because he is treating human beings as data sets.
Data sets.
Yeah. In this universe, remember, thinking machines and computers are strictly outlawed.
Oh, right. The Butlerian Jihad.
Exactly. Which led to the creation of mentats, human beings who are trained to compute probabilities and logic at superhuman levels.
Basically human supercomputers.
Right. And Paul is receiving this mentat training directly from Thufir. So when Paul asks these questions, he isn't actually listening to the words they say in response.
Wait, he's not?
No. He is reading their micro-expressions. He is analyzing pupil dilation, the tension in their facial muscles, the subtle shifts in their breathing.
At 12 years old.
At 12 years old, he deduces, purely through biological data, that these incredibly disciplined men genuinely do not know their destination.
That is terrifying and amazing. And then we bring his mother into the equation. Lady Jessica.
Oh, Jessica is fascinating here.
Because she has been a Gesserit trained, meaning she has total mastery over her own neurochemistry and psychological state.
Total mastery.
So when Duke Leto finally drops the bombshell that they are heading to the volatile planet of Ecaz.
A fact he kept hidden even from Jessica, by the way.
Right. Which is huge. She doesn't react with shock or anger. She turns it into a masterclass for her son. She explicitly tells Paul to seize this uncertainty, to file away all these details and organize your thoughts.
The mechanism of what Jessica is doing there is just vital to understand. She is teaching him emotional compartmentalization in real time.
Right.
Because in a political landscape defined by sudden catastrophic shifts in power, panic is a lethal vulnerability. You can't panic.
It'll get you killed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So she is forcing him to take the chaotic emotional energy of a family dispute, his parents keeping secrets from each other, and immediately sublimate it into analytical processing.
I see the utility in that, I really do. But I have to push back here a little bit.
Okay.
Isn't there a massive psychological risk in applying this level of pressure to a prepubescent brain? I mean, we look at his physical training, and it honestly borders on child endangerment.
It is intense, yes.
The sources detail this scene where Paul is sparring with a mech, and a mech is like a multi-armed, lethally sharp combat automaton, right? And it's equipped with a Holtzman shield. The neurobiology required just to survive this exercise seems impossibly taxing for a kid.
Well, to understand the cognitive load Paul is under there, we really have to look at the physics of the Holtzman shield.
Okay, break that down for us.
The shield creates a defensive field that violently repels any object moving above a certain velocity.
So if you swing hard, it bounces off.
Exactly. If you strike at it quickly, the shield stops your blade dead. The only way to penetrate it is the slow plunge.
The slow plunge.
Yeah, which means striking fast to parry, but intentionally slowing your weapon down at the exact moment of impact to slip through the field.
Which goes against every single human biological instinct.
Completely against it.
I mean, your sympathetic nervous system is screaming at you. When a razor-sharp metal arm swings at your head, your body dumps adrenaline into your bloodstream, demanding a fast, explosive reaction.
Really?
You want to hit hard and fast.
With fight or flight.
Exactly. So Paul has to consciously override his own autonomic nervous system, dodging at top speed, but attacking in slow motion.
And the sources show us that Thufir Hawat adds another layer of extreme cognitive friction to this exercise.
Oh, because the physical part wasn't hard enough.
Right. While Paul is literally fighting for his life, trying to override his own adrenaline, he is simultaneously interrogating Thufir about family history.
Yeah, he deliberately insults Thufir's storytelling, doesn't he?
He does, to force a reaction. And Thufir retaliates by dropping a massive traumatic truth on this kid.
Oh, the grandfather's death.
Yes. He reveals that Paul's grandfather, the old Duke Paulus, wasn't just killed in a sporting accident with a Seleucid bull.
Which was the official story.
The official story, yes. Thufir reveals he was assassinated through treachery, and Paul's own grandmother, Lady Helena, orchestrated it.
Just imagine the mental processing power required for that exact moment. You are 12, you are dodging a spinning blade, you are deliberately slowing your own muscle fibers down, and suddenly, your trusted mentor tells you that your grandmother murdered your grandfather.
It's an unimaginable cognitive load.
A normal person would freeze. And in that arena, freezing means the mech cuts your head off, but Thufir doesn't stop the machine.
No, in fact, he reprimands Paul for even showing a microsecond of hesitation.
Wow.
What Thufir and Jessica are doing here is systematic desensitization. They are forging a neural pathway in Paul's brain where extreme psychological trauma and physical danger do not trigger a breakdown.
They trigger focus instead.
Exactly. They trigger heightened analytical focus. It seems cruel, and it is, but if we look at the macro politics of the Landsrat, this grueling conditioning is just a baseline survival requirement.
Duke Leto and Jessica know that Paul is about to inherit a position on a geopolitical chessboard that is completely devoid of mercy.
Completely.
Right, which brings us to the actual destination of this journey, the planet Ecaz. Duke Leto is there to finalize a defensive alliance with Archduke Armand Ecaz against House Mauritani.
But this is where we see just how devoid of mercy this universe is.
Because the sources paint Ecaz as this incredibly lush, verdant world. The architecture of Armand's palace is, it's trapezoidal, it's organic, flowing with aqueducts, and it's carved from this vibrant bloodwood. It honestly feels like a fairy tale.
Visually, yes.
But the people running it operate with an absolute unyielding brutality.
They really do. And the sociology of this conflict is fascinating because the feud between Ecaz and Mauritani isn't just a political disagreement. It is, it's an ideological contagion.
It's affected everything.
Everything. House Mauritani previously launched an unprovoked, devastating attack. They destroyed the ancient Jinnah's Swordmaster's School.
Which is a huge deal in this universe.
Massive. They carpet-bombed Armand's government centers, killing his brother. And most significantly for our characters, Mauritani's soldiers murdered Armand's eldest daughter, Sonia.
And Sonia was betrothed to Duke Leto 16 years ago. So Leto and Armand are bonded by this shared visceral trauma.
Yes.
And in response to this, Armand hasn't just declared war. He has instituted a total, suffocating economic embargo on Grumman. House Mauritani is entirely cut off from the massive pharmaceutical wealth of Ecaz.
Which brings us to the crux of the current crisis.
Right. This is where the conflict narrows down to a deeply disturbing focal point. Viscount Mauritani has a young son named Wolfram, who is dying from a rare, agonizing wasting disease.
And the physiological details of Wolfram's condition in the text are just grim. The child requires constant Semuta trances just to survive the pain.
And Semuta is like a narcotic, right?
It's a powerful narcotic, yes, but it has to be paired with specific atonal music to take effect. It's an awful existence. Now, the only known cure for this disease is an incredibly rare drug derived on Ecaz, called Eswatpoi.
Okay.
Archduke Armand has total control over the supply chain of this drug, and he has explicitly ensured that not a single microgram reaches House Mauritani.
During the diplomatic negotiations, we see Duke Leto attempt to inject a tiny bit of humanitarian logic into the room. Leto's a father, right?
Mm-hmm.
He looks at the situation and gently suggests to Armand that perhaps providing the medicine, perhaps showing a single act of compassion for an innocent 10-year-old boy, might break the cycle of violence and actually resolve the conflict.
Which is a very reasonable suggestion from a modern standpoint.
Right.
But Armand's reaction completely strips away the veneer of his civilized, verdant planet. He picks up a crystalline vial of the cure.
The exact substance needed to save the child's life.
Yes. And he intentionally smashes it onto the stone floor. He explicitly states that denying this medicine is his chosen mechanism for making Viscount Mauritani feel a fraction of the pain Mauritani inflicted upon House Ecaz.
Okay, I have to pause here because this completely shatters traditional good guy narrative.
It really complicates it.
It does. Duke Leto is consistently framed in these sources as the moral center of the Landsraad. He's the honorable foil to the Harkonnens. Yet Leto is actively seeking to bind his house in an alliance with a man who gleefully executes a child through medical deprivation out of pure spite.
Yeah, it's dark.
How is Leto not a massive hypocrite here? I mean, if your ally is a child killer, doesn't your honor become completely meaningless?
That is the central paradox of feudal statecraft in this universe.
Uh,
You are applying a modern, universalist framework to a society that is built strictly on dynastic survival.
okay, explain that.
Well, the sources include a quote from the Ecaz family chronicle that explains their internal logic perfectly. It says, "Empires may rise and fall, but nothing is quite so enduring as hatred."
That is incredibly bleak.
It is. But in the Landsrod, vengeance isn't seen as a loss of control, like a tantrum. It is treated as a sacred obligation to your ancestors. If Armand cures the son of the man who murdered his daughter, in his eyes, he is betraying his daughter's memory.
Oh, I see.
And the sources prove that Leto shares this exact psychology.
Yes, he does, because Armand immediately tests Leto's hypocrisy. Armand asks Leto point blank, if the Baron Harkonnen's young nephew, Fade Rotha, were dying, would Leto provide the cure?
And what does Leto say?
Leto admits with absolute coldness that he would probably strangle the Harkonnen boy with his bare hands.
Exactly. It reveals the tragic flaw built into the entire system. The macro-level political warfare, the assassinations, the bombings, it inevitably trickles down and erodes the personal morality of the leaders.
Even the noble Atreides are entirely compromised by the cyclical nature of this trauma.
They are. And that erosion of the personal, for the sake of the political, leads us directly to these sacrifices Leto makes to secure this very alliance. Because Leto isn't just on Ecaz to sign a piece of paper. He is using his own life as geopolitical currency.
Right. To lock in this defensive pact against Mauritania, Leto agrees to marry Archduke Armand's surviving daughter, Elisa.
Which is a huge political move.
And he negotiates this entirely in secret. He doesn't consult Lady Jessica. He brings Jessica and Paul into the Archduke's audience room and just drops it on them as a unilateral decree.
The psychological dynamics in the aftermath of this announcement are just deeply complex. When Leto visits Jessica's quarters later that night, he's practically drowning in guilt.
You can feel it in the text.
You really can. He tries to rationalize the decision using pure political calculus, assuring her that the marriage is purely transactional, that he doesn't know or love Elisa, and that Jessica will remain his true partner in every way that matters.
He's desperate for her to tell him it's okay.
He is desperately seeking validation from her, yes.
But Jessica denies him that validation using the very training we discussed earlier. She drops into absolute Bene Gesserit emotional control.
It's chilling.
She actively suppresses her endocrine system, literally halting any tears or outward signs of betrayal. She adopts this icy, formal mask and tells him, I am just your concubine with no say in the matter.
Ouch.
It is a devastating tactic. She refuses to give him the catharsis of a fight. She reflects his own cold political statecraft right back at him, forcing him to just sit with the reality of what he has done.
And she understands that Leto is a prisoner of his own upbringing. Jessica points out the bitter irony that Leto's father, the old Duke, raised him to believe that a ruler must never marry for love.
Right, love is a vulnerability.
Exactly. Love is a vulnerability. Marriage is a shield. She tells Leto, how could you not believe as he did? But the true horror of this situation isn't just a broken heart. There's a massive systemic historical precedent hanging over this betrothal, one that makes Leto's decision incredibly dangerous.
We really have to look at the history here. 16 years prior, Leto had another concubine, Kailea Vernius, who had given him his firstborn son, Victor.
Right.
When Leto's affections shifted to Jessica, Kailea's marginalized status drove her into a paranoid, jealous spiral. She orchestrated an assassination attempt on Leto, and the resulting collateral damage was the death of young Victor.
So Leto is fully aware of the catastrophic consequences of a spurned concubine. He has already lost a child to this exact geopolitical mechanism.
He knows exactly what can happen.
Yet, the pressure applied by House Harkonnen and House Mauritania is so immense that the survival of his house demands he walk right back into the exact same structural minefield. He have no other viable move on the board.
It is the ultimate chess metaphor, but applied to human lives. Leto is forced into a position where sacrificing his queen, meaning Jessica's status and emotional security, is the only possible way to protect his king, the house itself.
But in this game, the queen is fully conscious, highly trained, and theoretically holding a knife.
Exactly. And young Paul is hyper-aware of this history. We see Paul back on Caladan, standing beneath these colossal harbor statues of his grandfather and his dead half-brother, Victor.
The cognitive synthesis Paul achieves in that moment is staggering for a 12-year-old.
It really is.
He doesn't just mourn a brother he never knew, he analyzes his own existence. He realizes that if Kylea hadn't tried to kill Leto, if Victor hadn't died, Jessica would never have been permitted to have a son. Paul's very life is the byproduct of political assassination.
And when Jessica finds him there, Paul doesn't ask for maternal comfort. His mind immediately goes to the succession crisis. He asks her, "When my father marries Elisa, will I still be his heir?"
He is looking at the board and calculating his own expendability.
Which is heartbreaking, and Jessica's response is perhaps the most profound display of her discipline. She's currently enduring massive personal humiliation and fear regarding Leto's marriage, but she completely swallows her own trauma to protect Paul's psychological stability.
She didn't let him see her bleed.
No, she assures him, without hesitation, that Leto loves him and that his inheritance is secure. She refuses to let the political rot infect his foundational trust in his father.
It perfectly illustrates the cost of power. The Atreides are bleeding themselves dry emotionally just to build a defensive wall, but while Leto is making these agonizing, rule-bound sacrifices, his enemies are operating on a completely different paradigm.
Yeah, they're playing a different game entirely.
They are exploiting the system while ignoring the rules entirely. And to see that, the sources shift focus from the solemn shores of Caladan to the absolute sensory overload of Caladan, the imperial capital.
The contrast is so jarring. The Padishah Emperor, Shaddam IV, is hosting this extravagant, universe-wide celebration for his wedding to Firenze of House Thorvald. It is a massive display of wealth and soft power.
Fireworks, parades, jubilation.
But hidden within a lavish guest suite, we find a man who views the entire spectacle with utter contempt. Baron Vladimir Harkonnen.
The text gives us such a visceral introduction to the Baron.
Yes, it does.
He requires suspensor mechanisms, these anti-gravity belts, just to support his massive physical bulk. He's receiving an intimate massage, complaining about his restrictive formal wear, and he's treating the Emperor's wedding not as a celebration, but as a tedious, mandatory bureaucratic audit.
He knows the Emperor's Chamberlain is taking attendance, checking the ledgers to see who is loyal and who is absent.
Exactly. The Baron operates entirely through the lens of leverage and economics. While at the banquet, meticulously scanning his food with a poisoned snooper, he is approached by Viscount Mauritani.
And the juxtaposition between these two men reveals two very different types of predators.
Oh, absolutely.
The Baron is a creature of the shadows. He adheres strictly to the rules of the War of Assassins because those rules protect him while he slowly bleeds his enemies dry. Mauritani, however, is unrefined, volatile, and famously reckless with collateral damage.
And Mauritani comes to the Baron essentially begging for an alliance. The Ecaz embargo has bankrupted him. He is paying exorbitant black market rates just to procure the Semuta his son needs to survive.
And he doesn't just explain this, he brings his dying 10-year-old son, Wolfram, right into the Imperial banquet hall.
It's a shocking breach of protocol.
It is. The boy is heavily drugged, visibly wasting away in front of everyone.
The Baron observes this and immediately identifies desperation, which to him translates directly as profit.
Always.
He agrees to travel to Grumman to discuss terms. Now, when the Harkonnen delegation arrives on Grumman, the underlying sociology of Mauritani's rage becomes visible. We discussed the lushness of Ecaz earlier. Well, Grumman is its dark mirror.
Centuries of unchecked industrial exploitation have hollowed the planet out.
The capital city literally sits on the edge of a dry seabed, surrounded by mining tunnels. The environment itself is hostile and exhausted.
And the culture reflects that hostility perfectly. The welcoming ceremony involves wranglers trying to capture a wild Genghis stallion. And these aren't normal horses. They are massive, violent beasts with spiny protrusions on their heads.
They're terrifying.
They use yellow energy shields like lassos to try and hold it, but the beast breaks loose and nearly crushes the Baron. It takes Mauritani's swordmaster, High Resser, firing a volley of stun darts just to bring it down.
But Mauritani is actually proud of the chaos. He boasts that a Ginga could easily kill a Seleucid bull.
Which is a deliberate psychological jab meant to signal his capacity for violence, referencing the beast that killed Duke Leto's father.
Exactly. But the truly terrifying revelation happens away from the spectacle, inside Mauritani's dim, stone-walled fortress. Mauritani takes his swordmaster into a highly secure vault. He accesses an armored drawer and withdraws an ancient, curling sheet of Instroy paper.
And this document is the equivalent of a galactic dirty bomb.
It really is.
It is a stolen fragment of the Bene Gesserit breeding records, and it proves that House Mauritani is actually operating under a false identity. Thousands of years ago, they were known as House Tantor.
Now, to understand the weight of this, we have to deeply analyze the Great Convention.
Let's do it.
The Great Convention is the universal treaty that prevents the great houses from annihilating each other. Its primary unbreakable law is the absolute prohibition of the use of atomic weapons against human targets.
Mutually assured destruction.
The concept of mutually assured destruction is hardwired into the political genome. If any house uses atomics, the entire Landsraad will unite and glass their planet from orbit.
And House Tantor is the boogeyman of that history. They are the erased, renegade family responsible for the ancient Seleucia incident, an atomic strike that devastated the original imperial capital of Seleucia Secundus.
They committed the ultimate war crime.
And the emperor ordered a systematic, bloody extermination of their entire bloodline.
Exactly. So Mauritani is revealing that his ancestors survived the purge and changed their name. But what is truly staggering here is not just the genetic history, but the psychology of keeping the physical proof.
Yeah, that makes no sense.
The swordmaster, Resser, points out the obvious logic. He says if the emperor ever finds this piece of paper, House Mauritani will be eradicated instantly. He asks Mauritani why he doesn't just burn it.
Which is the exact question I had. If you have a document proving you are the descendant of the universe's greatest war criminals, why keep it sitting in a drawer? It's like framing the murder weapon from a cold case and hanging it in your office. It defies all strategic logic.
Because Mauritani isn't operating on strategic logic anymore, he is operating on ideological obsession.
Okay.
He tells Resser that he needs the document as a constant reminder of the destruction my noble house is capable of. It serves as a psychological anchor.
Wow.
In a universe where he feels completely powerless, his planet is ruined, his son is dying, his enemies are strangling him, this piece of paper validates his internal narrative of supreme destructive power. It fuels his dual hatred. Hatred for the emperor who hunted his ancestors, and hatred for Archduke Ecaz who was torturing his son.
And we see that absolute detachment from consequence when he finally sits down with the Baron and his mentat, Peter de Vries. Mauritani casually pitches the idea of sending a special gift to Duke Leto's upcoming wedding, and he literally raises his eyebrows and floats the idea of using forbidden atomics.
The reaction from the Harkonnens is incredibly telling here. The Baron, a man who orchestrates mass murder before breakfast, genuinely recoils in terror.
He's actually scared.
He is, because the Baron understands that the system only functions if everyone fears the Great Convention. Utilizing atomics isn't a military strategy, it's a suicide pact.
The Baron immediately scrambles to create plausible deniability. Mauritani scales back his proposal, clarifying that he doesn't want to vaporize Ecaz because he intends to conquer and rule it.
Right.
He wants to send a more targeted personal message of horrific violence. And the Baron, recognizing that he is dealing with a madman, tells Mauritani to take all the credit.
Yeah, he washes his hands of it.
The Harkonnens will supply logistical support from the shadows, but they want zero trace of their involvement when Mauritani finally unleashes whatever nightmare he has planned.
The Baron correctly deduces that Mauritani's final tether to reality is fraying. And the sources show us the exact moment that tether snaps entirely.
Yes, the breaking point.
We move forward in the timeline. Remaining on the desolate world of Grumman, the inevitable tragedy occurs. Young Wolfram finally succumbs to his disease in his sick room.
The sensory details provided for this scene are just suffocating. The air is thick with the smell of melange and pungent smuta smoke. A tonal, wailing music is looping in the background. The Viscount is leaning over the bed, kissing his son's sunken cheek.
It's haunting.
And when the boy stops breathing, Mauritani's denial is so profound that several seconds pass before he even registers the death.
But when the reality sets in, his reaction is not conventional mourning. He doesn't break down and weep. His grief undergoes an instantaneous, terrifying transmutation into spectacular, unrestrained violence.
He just snaps.
Completely snaps. He physically destroys the medical equipment in the room. And then he turns his focus onto the attending physician, Dr. Vando Terbali.
Now, we need to pause here and explain exactly who Dr. Terbali is, because it dictates the magnitude of what happens next. He is a Suk doctor, bearing the diamond tattoo on his forehead. What does that actually mean in the context of this society?
The Suk imperial conditioning is the highest echelon of psychological programming in the known universe. It is not an oath, it is a profound, artificially induced neurological block that absolutely prevents the doctor from taking a human life.
They literally cannot kill.
They cannot. Because it is universally accepted that a Suk doctor cannot betray their patient or cause harm, they are granted absolute, unquestioned immunity across all political borders. They are the untouchable neutral party in a universe defined by paranoia.
And Mauritani doesn't care.
Not at all.
He looks at this deeply conditioned, universally protected healer and blames him for failing to procure the cure. Dr. Turbali actually screams, "I am a Suk. I have immunity." He believes the foundational rules of civilization will protect him.
But they don't.
No. Mortani draws a curved cudgel knife and plunges it directly into the doctor's chest, right in front of his entire royal court. He tells the dying man, "Then heal yourself."
The sociological impact of that single knife thrust is paradigm shifting. By murdering a conditioned Suk doctor, Mortani broadcasts to every witness, especially his swordmaster, High Resser, that the foundational rules of their civilization no longer apply.
He's thrown out the rulebook entirely.
Exactly. The Great Convention, imperial immunity, basic human morality, Mortani has discarded all of it. A man who has lost his future, represented by his son, no longer fears consequence.
It is the terrifying culmination of the life shapes life axiom. The Baron Harkonnen kills for profit, it's business, but Mortani is a grieving father armed with planetary-level resources. He is pure, unadulterated chaos.
He's a loose cannon.
And the murder of the doctor is just the catalyst. He runs out of the room covered in blood and demands that Resser bring him the 11 Ecaz smugglers who failed to bypass the embargo to get the medicine.
The execution he devises for these men is intentionally barbaric. It's designed to maximize agony and symbolic degradation.
It's so hard to read.
It is. He orders the smugglers bound by their ankles to the wild, spiny Ganga horses. He then has them dragged to death across the jagged, rocky seabed of Grumman. As he surveys their mangled remains, he declares to his swordmaster that he can no longer stand the sight of the Ekazi race.
Which shifts his motivation from personal vengeance to outright genocide. And this brings us back to the stark contrast between the two leaders at the center of these sources.
Leto and Mortani.
Right. Look at Duke Leto Atreides. Leto's life has been defined by grief. He lost his father to a treacherous assassination. He lost his firstborn son, Victor, to a politically motivated attack. But Leto takes that grief, internalizes it, and uses it to construct defensive alliances.
He builds something with it.
Yes, he honors his obligations, even when it forces him to systematically dismantle his own personal happiness and his relationship with Lady Jessica.
Leto utilizes trauma as a building block for stability. Mortani, subjected to a parallel grief, utilizes trauma as an accelerant for annihilation.
He just wants everything to burn.
He uses his pain to grant himself absolution from all moral constraints. The texts perfectly align these two massive opposing forces. You have the Atreides enduring incredible psychological pressure to secure their dynastic future through a calculated wedding, and you have the Mortanis actively preparing to weaponize that very wedding to burn the universe down just to make their enemies feel their pain.
It is a stunning display of political and psychological world building. So let's pull all of this together and look at what we've unpacked today. We started by examining the neurobiological and mental crucible used to forge 12-year-old Paul Atreides, teaching a child to compartmentalize severe family trauma while dodging a lethal blade.
A literal trial by fire.
We analyzed the socioeconomic disparities and historical blood feuds driving House Ecaz and House Mortani. We explored the devastating collateral damage of statecraft, witnessing Leto and Jessica sacrifice their personal relationship on the altar of political survival.
Right.
And finally, we watched the complete psychological collapse of Viscount Mortani, a man who shed the rules of civilization the moment his son died, all while the Harkonnens calculate their profit margins in the shadows.
It really demonstrates that in this universe, power is never static. It is a constant grinding friction between historical trauma and the desperate need for survival.
And as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over, drawn directly from the text's epigraphs.
Oh, the epigraphs are so good.
They really are. Throughout these excerpts, we see the function of the swordmasters. We observe Duncan Idaho, Whitmore Blood, and Rivi Denari, highly disciplined, honorable men who find joy in sparring and who proudly serve leaders they believe are righteous.
But then you must consider High Resser, the Grumman swordmaster. The text provides a haunting philosophical question posed by Joel Murray, the founder of the swordmaster tradition. He asks, which is more honorable, to loyally follow a monster to whom you have sworn your life, or to break your sacred oath and walk away?
Resser is not a fool. He sees everything. He watched Mortani reveal the Tantor document, proving a legacy of ultimate atrocity.
He watched Mortani murder a protected Suk doctor in cold blood.
He oversaw the barbaric dragging of the smugglers. Resser knows with absolute certainty that the man he serves is a monster capable of breaking the Great Convention. Yet Resser remains. He tells Mauritani, "I live only to serve you."
It exposes the ultimate ethical trap of a rigid, feudal society. When your entire identity is built upon an unbreakable vow of loyalty, morality becomes outsourced to the person holding your leash.
So the question I leave you with is this. At what precise moment does unwavering loyalty cross the line into active complicity? If you pledge your life to be a blade in the hand of a ruler, and that ruler uses you to slaughter the innocent or burn a world to ash, do you retain your honor because you kept your word? Or does keeping your word make you entirely responsible for the destruction that follows?
It completely challenges the very definition of honor in a system designed to exploit it.
Like we said at the beginning of our exploration today, we all like to admire the polished, finished sword. We rarely want to look at the brutal, messy fire required in the forge. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. Keep questioning the historical narratives you are handed, keep examining the unseen mechanisms of power, and we'll see you next time.